Death at Rottingdean. Chapter 11. Foxes made in Germany. Considerable indignation is being aroused in the hunting districts in consequence of the importation of foxes bred in Germany. Farmers are loud in their protestations against the practice and allege that they are sustaining frequent and heavy losses by Reynard's nightly visits to their homesteads. The German fox is described as being even more vicious than his English namesake. The Daily Telegraph, August 30th, 1897. Charles and Kipling stepped out of Kate's Panhard in front of the stately stone-fronted residence in King's Garden Hoe, a little before 8. The liveried footman was occupied in directing a carriage to a spot at the side of the street. He turned, one eyebrow raised, to stare at the car with a disdainful hauteur. "I beg your pardon, sir," he said stiffly, "but I must ask you to drive your machine around the back. This space is reserved for guests' horses and carriages." Kipling, always a little hot-tempered, opened his mouth to retort, but Charles motioned him back into the motorcar. "This happens frequently," he said, with a crooked grin, piloting the noisy machine in the direction that the footman had indicated. "People hardly know what to do with an automobile, so they treat it were it a tradesman's vehicle." Kipling grinned. "Well, let them," he said. "But this ride has made a convert of me, I must say. You must show me how all its mechanisms work. I'm rather keen on that sort of thing, you know. When it's time to look for another residence, I shall see about hiring a motor car." "But I thought you had taken the Elms for 3 years." Charles stopped the Panhard that they got out. "You're not settling in Rottingdean, then?" It was Kipling's turn to be rueful. "The house is not an ideal residence. Rottingdean is too close to Brighton, for one thing, and already the day trippers have become a nuisance. They ride past in a disreputable old char-a-banc and gawk at me through the study window, or they cluster outside the gate and pester our legitimate callers. I'm afraid we will be obliged to have the gate boarded over." "Perhaps that's the price you must pay for fame," Charles said with a laugh. "Not I," Kipling said determinedly. "Anyway, I think it is better to put some distance between Carrie and Aunt Georgie. It is easier just now when Carrie is occupied with little John, but both are strong-willed women, and one is not entirely comfortable in the midst of them. If we do not locate another residence by spring, I believe I shall take Carrie and the children off to South Africa for a time." They had come around the front of the Sassoon house, under the nose of the haughty footman, and were greeted at the door by the butler and ushered into a grand marble-floored hall, where they surrendered their motoring coats and hats to a black-gowned maid. "The gathering is in the library, my lord," the butler said to Charles, and led them down the hall to a double door, which he opened with a stately flourish. They stepped into an opulent oak-panelled room lined with books and fine paintings and filled with small groups of men in black coats and white ties. Several tables lavishly decorated with hothouse flowers were laden with food suitable to fashionable standing supper. Beef and ham sandwiches, fresh whole oysters, lobster patties, sausage rolls, potato rissoles, cheeses, fruits, sweetmeats, sponge cakes, the prince's favourite Scotch shortcake, and plates of petit fours. Green felt-topped tables for cards had been set up in an adjoining room, and a quartet of musicians was playing a Strauss waltz in the corner, hidden behind a cluster of potted plants. The air was already blue with the smoke of cigars, and the conversations were occasionally punctured by bursts of laughter and the clink of champagne glasses. At the announcement of their names, the prince, stout and affable, his nautical beard neatly trimmed, turned and came toward them. Charles was not an intimate of the Marlborough House set, but he had met the Prince of Wales on several other occasions. In fact, he and Kate, prior to their marriage, had helped to resolve an embarrassing and politically dangerous situation at a house party at Easton Lodge, the home of the Countess of Warwick. The prince, the target of a potentially damaging blackmail plot, had been so impressed with Charles's forensic skills that he had declared himself ready on the spot to lend royal support to a national independent forensic laboratory, headed, of course, by Charles himself. It was a suggestion that Charles firmly resisted, and he was glad that the idea seemed to have slipped the prince's mind. While he enjoyed the challenge of an occasional criminal investigation, Charles did not intend to make a career out of it. He had far too much else to do now that he had been obliged to take on the daunting responsibility of the Somersworth and the unpleasantness of Parliament. "Sheridan, good to see you," the prince exclaimed and extended his hand. Charles took it with a bow and greeted their host, Arthur Sassoon, then introduced Kipling. "Mr. Kipling, sir," the prince exclaimed, beaming. "Splendid to meet you at last. I can't tell you how much we all admired the poem that appeared in the Times this summer. Her Majesty was quite pleased." "I'm delighted to hear it, sir," Kipling said, with what Charles thought was uncharacteristic modesty. Glad to have been of service. I fear it was not your customary Jubilee ode, however. The prince laughed. There was a ghastly crop of them, wasn't there? A footman held up a silver cigar box, and he took out a cigar and held it to be lit. Yes, he said more soberly. Amidst the pomp and circumstance of the Jubilee, recessional gave one something to think about, put the whole affair into a different perspective, as it were. He puffed. Charles accepted a glass of wine from a silver tray, smiling to himself. If the Empress of India had been pleased with Kipling's recessional, it was probably because she had not fully understood it. The phrase, lest we forget, cautioned rather than celebrated the accomplishment of imperialist England. He rather thought the prince had taken Kipling's point, however. In the next moment, he was sure of it. Yes, well, I speak for us all when I say the poem was entirely appropriate to the occasion, the prince said, lingering on the subject. We must not allow ourselves to become complacent. Your Royal Highness speaks a solemn truth, said a tall, pale, goateed man at the royal elbow. Great power must be forever vigilant lest it be overtaken. Captain Pierre Gostard of the French Navy, Sassoon murmured to Charles. He's in England to participate in manoeuvres with Her Majesty's fleet. The prince turned to Kipling. I understand that you have spent some time with the fleet this summer, sir. Yes, a fortnight, Kipling said warmly. Took part in the steam trials of a prototype destroyer. A devil's darling needle she was. 20-foot beam, 210 overall. The little witch jumped from 22 knots to 30 like a whipped horse. She'll not be overtaken, I warrant, so once she's into production. But that will take some time, growled the French captain. Meanwhile, the Germans are building up their navy with an almost frightening speed. He glanced at the prince. You will forgive me, your highness, for talking of such things, but I learned just yesterday that a new ironclad, the Kaiser Wilhelm II, was launched recently at Kiel. Another, an armoured cruiser of 14,000 horsepower, is to take the waves shortly. And I'm told that the Kaiser had carefully studied Admiral Mahon's book on the influence of sea power and is determined that Germany shall be supreme on the world's oceans. The prince flicked his cigar. Quite so, he murmured. Nephew Willie has always wanted to be thought superior. Now that he's been bested in yachts and horses, he's taken to navies. Unfortunately for him, he will have to spend a great deal of money to catch up. Even Italy has more warships. The remark elicited chuckles all around, but Charles knew that the prince was not being entirely truthful. The Royal Yacht Britannia, the joy of the prince's heart, had won every yacht racing prize there was, until the Kaiser commissioned her designer to build a yacht his uncle could not defeat. But when the superior German Meteor II appeared at Cowes, the prince simply refused to compete. He sold the Britannia and concentrated instead on his racing stables, winning the Grand National, the 2,000 guineas, and the Newmarket. Just this year his horse Persimmon had brought him a second derby. A thwarted Wilhelm, meanwhile, vented his spleen by building bigger and better warships. Perhaps, Mr. Kipling, said a slim, elegant gentleman with a gold-rimmed monocle, dark hair parted fashionably in the centre, you should send a copy of your poem to the Kaiser. Humility is a virtue to be practised under all flags. Well said, your excellency, the prince exclaimed with a shout of laughter and slapped the man's back. Very well said. I'll have a copy posted immediately with my compliments. Willie won't know what to make of it. You know the poor fellow has no sense of humour. The prince... None whatsoever, your highness, the gentleman murmured and bowed, clicking his heels together. The prince glanced up as a handsome, blond young man approached. Ah, Cornwallis West, he said cordially. My dear boy, how are you? The Princess of Wales was asking where I'd seen you just the other day. Lord Sheridan, Mr. Kipling, may I present Count Ludwig Hauptmann of Germany, Sassoon said as the prince stepped aside to talk with the young man. Actually, I prefer to think of myself as a Bavarian, the monocled count said, and Charles heard the faint accent in the man's English. It is inevitable that Bavaria is united with Prussia, and since we share a common frontier and language. Still, ever since Bismarck forced the alliance upon us, I have felt it an uncomfortable relationship. A small smile flickered in his blue eyes, so pale as to almost be glacial. I suppose it may come down finally to temperament. We Bavarians are not so rash as our Prussian neighbours. We are more deliberate. Rash is exactly the word, Kipling said, taking out his pipe and lighting it. The Kaiser's congratulatory telegram to Kruger after the Jameson raid, the reckless Prussian way, wouldn't you say, didn't give a thought to the effect of other governments. Are you sure? Charles asked, sipping his wine. Perhaps the Kaiser gave it a great deal of thought and achieved exactly the effect he intended. "Entirely correct," the Count said. He adjusted his monocle. "And therein lies the difference. We Bavarians would not dream of interfering with British interests in South Africa or anywhere else." Charles took note of the man's narrow patrician face and pinched nose, and wondered whether he was speaking the truth. The French captain snorted. "Would that your Prussian confederates held the same view," he said, and puffed out a cloud of cigar smoke. "The continent is too small for new powers to flex such large muscles." "Exactly," Kipling said, squinting through the tobacco haze. "The big squeeze, the Kaiser's bullying may seem merely childish braggadocio to some, but there's trouble ahead, mark my words." "We are being challenged on several fronts," Charles agreed. "I had the opportunity to visit the Krupp arms work at Essen several years ago. The Germans' technological advances are quite impressive." True, Kipling replied, stabbing the air empathetically. "And they'll use that technology to harass their neighbors." "That's not entirely fair," Sassoon objected. "The Germans have used their technology to produce scientific equipment, advances in chemistry, and fine motor cars, the Benz and the Daimler, for example." The French captain raised one eyebrow. "Ah, but the Panhard motor car Lord Sheridan and Mr. Kipling arrived in is of French manufacture," he observed with a slight smile. "What do you say to that, Monsieur Sassoon?" Sassoon smiled. "Actually, my taste runs more in horses than horsepower," he turned to Kipling. "I keep a pair of hunters at the Hawkham stable very near Rottingdean. There is excellent hunting in the Downs, and the Brookside Harriers are exceptionally fine." He frowned. "Unfortunately, the area is in danger of being overhunted, and the master is faced with the prospect of encouraging the importation of foxes or of riding farther afield than many would like." "Importation of foxes!" Kipling exclaimed. "I've never heard of such a thing." Sassoon shrugged. "But where there are no vermin, there is no hunt. What is one then to do?" Charles, never having been a fox-hunting man, was tempted to suggest that there might be other worthy forms of sport, but thought the better of it in the moment. "Well, sir," Kipling said, "the stable is within a stone's throw of my house. When you are there, you must join Mrs. Kipling and me for tea." Charles turned to the Count. "I read recently of the work of one of your fellow Bavarians, Professor Röntgen, at the University of Würzburg. He's a scientist." The Count raised one shoulder carelessly. "I'm afraid I don't know the man, my lord. I prefer the arts to sciences. The theatre is one of my great loves. Actually, I'm in this country as my government's cultural representative. The virtues of Teutonic culture are underappreciated here. However, I cannot offend British sensibilities by showing off too much enthusiasm. I work, shall we say, in a subterranean way." He gave himself a self-deprecating smile. "Who is this professor?" "Röntgen discovered X-ray," Charles said. "It has made him world famous. The Kaiser is quite to count his discovery among German technological achievements." "One does not always have the time to keep up," the Count said ruefully. "Sheridan," Sassoon exclaimed to the Count, "is something of a scientist himself." "These X-rays," he remarked to Charles, "they're quite the thing, aren't they? Hold all sorts of promise for medical advancement, I understand. Dr. Barriston was speaking to me about them." "Dr. Barriston!" Charles exclaimed. "Yes, I've corresponded with him on the topic several times. He is using X-rays to set fractures." "Pardon?" the French captain asked quizzically. "How is that so?" Charles smiled. As a photographer as well as an amateur scientist, it was a subject in which he had great interest. "X-rays are a very powerful type of radiation," he said, "where light rays reflect off the skin. These pass through the skin and soft tissues and reveal an image of the skeleton. A surgeon might place photographic film under a broken bone, a forearm, say, and use an X-ray apparatus to determine the nature and location of the fracture. They could be used to equal advantage to explore for other dense material, a bullet lodged in the body, for instance." The Count's monocle fell from his eye. "Are you telling me that a bullet can be viewed inside a body?" "It can indeed," Charles said. "If you like, I'm sure that Dr. Barriston would be glad to give you a demonstration. He's quite keen on—" He was interrupted by the sound of a commotion in the hallway. A footman scurried up behind Sassoon and spoke urgently in his ear. The host frowned, then turned to Kipling. "There is a young person in the hallway who claims to have a message for you, Mr. Kipling. He will not say what it is, insists on seeing you in person." Kipling looked alarmed. "I hope it is not family emergency. I left Mrs. Kipling at home with our new son." He looked around. "I wonder if His Highness will excuse—" The prince was standing nearby with a glass in one hand and a cigar in the other. "Oh, for heaven's sake, man!" he exclaimed loudly. "Don't wait on ceremony." He gestured toward the double doors. "By all means, go if you must." But at that moment the doors burst open and a small boy hurtled through, a footman still grasping the sleeve of his knitted jersey. With some astonishment, Charles recognized him as the tousle-haired, freckle-faced Irish boy who had told them what he had seen on the beach. "Patrick!" Kipling exclaimed anxiously. "Were you sent? Is something wrong at the Elms?" "Not at the Elms, sir." The boy twisted out of the footman's grasp. He looked around, seeing for the first time the crowd of staring, silent men. His face flamed. I know it's cheeky, but it's awfully important, or I wouldn't have." "Well, if it's not Mrs. Kipling or the children," Kipling snapped, "what the devil is it?" Patrick stared down at his shoes. It's another dead man, sir," he said in a small voice. "The Coast Guard from Rottingdean, Captain Smith, sir. I found him in the windmill. He's been shot." The prince strode forward and put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Her Majesty's Coast Guard has been shot," he demanded imperiously. "Who have the audacity to do such a thing?" The boy looked up at him, his eyes widening. "Sir?" "His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales," Kipling said, and added, not unkindly, "Answer the question." The boy swallowed hard, then lifted his chin. "I don't know, Your Royal Highness, sir," he said. "I don't know who did it." "Your name, boy?" the prince asked. "Patrick," the boy said. "You say, Patrick, that this is another dead man. A second, you mean?" "Yes, sir. But surely not 2 dead Coast Guards." The boy gulped. "I'm afraid so, sir." The prince looked at Charles. "You're staying at Rottingdean, aren't you, Sheridan? What do you know of this?" "Nothing of this," Charles replied uneasily. He had the sense that he knew what was coming. But yesterday morning the body of the Black Rock Coast Guard patrol, a young man named George Radford, was fished out of the channel. Village gossip has it that he committed suicide. Patrick, however, witnessed the body being hauled from the beach into the sea under the cover of darkness, so there would seem to be some question about that. "Ah," the prince said. He was scowling. "I trust that the local police are handling the matter expeditiously." Kipling's chuckle was mirthless. "The local police, sir, are a local joke." "I didn't tell the constable," the boy said earnestly to Kipling. "I didn't think you would. That is—" He let the sentence die away. The prince looked from the boy to Kipling. "Do I gather from this," he asked, narrowing his eyes, "that the local constabulary are incapable of investigating these serious crimes?" "I suggested to the constable that his lordship be involved, Your Highness," Kipling said, pushing his lips in and out. He paused delicately. "The suggestion, unfortunately, was not well received." Charles gave an inward sigh. He was more and more certain of what was to come, and he did not like it. But there was nothing he could do. When royalty spoke, it was accustomed to be obeyed. The prince's scowl deepened and his voice grew more gruff. 2 of the Crown's Coast Guards murdered in 2 days, and the local police are refusing assistance. This will not do. It will not do at all. He turned to Sassoon. "Arthur, you know the chief constable here at Brighton, do you not?" "I do, Your Highness," Sassoon said with alacrity. "Sir Robert Pinkney, an excellent fellow, quite forward in his methods." Good. Send a message to him forthwith, letting him know what has happened. Tell him that I have taken a personal interest in the case and that I am authorizing Lord Sheridan to conduct an investigation on behalf of the Crown. Have him send his best men to assist." Charles felt he owed it to Kate to make an effort to resist, although he knew very well the outcome. "Sir, her ladyship and I—" "Ah, Lady Sheridan is with you at Rottingdean," the prince returned. "Splendid. Let her know I asked after her health, will you? Now, is there anything else you might need for your investigation other than the chief constable's assistance?" Charles sighed. "If there is, sir, you can be sure I shall not hesitate to ask for it." "Good," the prince said warmly. "I am off in the morning for a week's shooting at Abergeldy Castle. I shall expect you to telegraph your report to me." He reached into his pocket and turned to the boy. "Patrick, you have done well to bring this situation to my attention. This sovereign is for you." And he took out a gold coin and pressed it into the boy's hand. The boy blinked. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." With a satisfied smile, the prince turned to Sassoon. "Well, now that the matter is settled, Arthur, I believe it is time for a game. What do you say to a small wager, eh?"